What's up, everybody, and thank you for watching Changing Optics with Scott Roth. And today we're going to talk about the difference between full frame and crop sensors. Different cameras that are out there, and most of them are full frame. You know, your pro level cameras like your Canon 5D, your Canon 6D, all those. And then there's prosumer cameras that are the Rebel series cameras, and some of your 80D, which is this being filmed on, the 7D, the 60D. Some of those are considered crop sensor cameras. So I'm a Canon tuner. There's also Nikon. Almost every camera brand out there has your full frame and your crop sensor cameras. Now with that, all the lenses are the same as far as measurement are concerned. So a perfect example is, this is a EFS 17 to 50. Try to see if you can see it there. So anyway, so this EFS 17 to 55, even though it was designed for a crop sensor, which means you can't use it on a full frame, it is the measurements 17 to 55 are still the full frame point of view. So what that means is that inside of a full frame sensor, there's a 35 millimeter size sensor, roughly around that size, you know, and a crop sensor is a little bit smaller. So on a Canon, it's actually 1.6 size smaller. So it's giving you a smaller window, not necessarily a window, but a smaller sensor size to capture the image. Between a crop sensor and a full frame is that the full frame is giving you a larger size to capture the image on, versus a crop sensor, which is a little bit smaller. Now, here's where the crop sensor comes into inclusion, is that you have to change your measurements. So the best way to explain that, the best way to do that is, if you look behind me, there is a 3-panel window. So what we're going to do is that, if you happen to notice, you know, you get a nice big view of the leg, you know. So let's say that that's 35 millimeters lens that you're using, and you're getting that big, nice field of view. Now, if you were to sit back and now switch that 35 millimeter lens over to, let's say, a crop sensor camera, what happens is that you're losing a lot of your field of view. And now this is the field of view that you're working with on a crop sensor, so you're getting a much smaller image. But you're taking that 35 millimeter lens and you're putting it on a crop sensor. And what happens is, because you're doing a smaller field of view, crop factor equivalent, in order to sit back and see that same field of view, has to be now at a smaller distance, right? So in order to get the same view that we had before on the full frame on the crop sensor, now the lens would have to operate closer to the sensor. So the best way to explain that is that, if you see how you see less now, if you wanted to sit back and see the same, the crop factor equivalent now, the sensor has to be closer . So as you see, by having the sensor operate closer to the lens, you're then getting the similar field of view. So that 35 millimeter, when you put it on a crop sensor, is going to give you closer to more of a 50 millimeter lens, right? It's going to be a 50 millimeter point of view because you're looking at it as a crop sensor. So if you want to get the same field of view on the crop sensor now with that 35 millimeter that you were doing on the full frame, you then have to shoot at a closer distance, focal range wise. So you wouldn't want to sit back and continue at that 35 millimeter range. You're going to want to have to go down to like about a 20 millimeter range. So that 20 millimeter range on a crop sensor is going to give you the same field of view that the 35 millimeter frame lens did on the full frame. So if you're using a prime lens, you'd have to switch lenses. If you're using a zoom lens and you can go down from 35, you can do that. So that's something that you have to factor in. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that you have to move closer or further away from your subject matter. You know, if you're on a crop sensor and you want to get the same field of view, you would just back up. But that's almost impossible, because the difference in the lens, with the lenses and the cameras, is you're talking about literally like 1.5 millimeters, right? As far as from, you know, 1 to 1.5. So now that also gets multiplied, you know, as you can move further along. So if So it does get confusing though. So that 35 millimeters, 1.5 would be 50 millimeters. So you're talking about the difference. Let's say so this is 17 to 55. So 35 millimeters to 50 millimeters is within this lens. So right now it's currently at 17. So let's say we go up to 35 to 55, right? So you're literally, so this is the, I don't know if you could see it on the thing, but let's go there. So you see a little bit gap between the 35 and the 55 on this. So this is at 35 and this is at 55, right? That's the difference. So when they sit back and say that, oh, you can just move back, you're basically just going to lean back like that much. It's not going to work. That's not how it works, right? That's not the proper approach. So that's part of the reason we wanted to sit back and do this lesson, is that people know, like when they're using a crop sensor and they want to get that field of view that a full frame would do, that moving back is not the solution, because you can't move back in that same way, and you're changing the distance between you and the subject matter. Like for instance, you're changing the distance between us and that nice boat outside and some of that river view. So you literally have to change the distance that you're changing within the camera itself, right? So you would shoot here maybe on a full frame, and when you go to a crop sensor, you want to shoot this one, right? You want to change that subtle difference, and that's where that 1.5 factor comes into it. So now that distance, the bigger the measurement is that 1.5 still applies. So what I mean by that is that when you're at 35, the relationship is to 50. 50, 1.5 is 75, so it's a bigger jump. So because of that, the way that a crop factor uses, let's say, a 200 millimeter lens, behaves more like 250, or so 200 times 1.5 is 300 millimeters, right? So you could take a 200 millimeter lens, put it on a crop sensor camera, and you're getting a 300 millimeter point of view. So a lot of bird photographers, a lot of your sports photographers, they get that extra distance by simply using a 200 millimeter lens on a crop sensor lens frame, rather than getting a 300 millimeter lens for a full frame, which is much more expensive. So that's one of the main reasons to factor in things like the crop sensor versus full frame, because it can benefit you in those different ways. So we hope you got some good advice out of this, and thank you for watching.